In 1935, a man lying on a couch in Virginia Beach, Virginia, thousands of miles from Egypt, eyes closed, apparently asleep, began to speak. He said that beneath the paws of the Great Sphinx, there was a hidden room, a vault, a record chamber built by a lost civilization, sealed away to survive a coming catastrophe and destined to be rediscovered in our lifetime. His name was Edgar Cayce, and nearly a century later, people are still searching for the room he described. Some believe it's the greatest undiscovered secret in human history. Others believe it's one of the most persistent myths ever attached to a real archaeological site. Today, we're going to look at both sides, the prophecy, the real science, and the question that just won't go away. What, if anything, is really buried beneath the Sphinx? Section 1. Building the Sphinx. What we actually know. Before we get to the legend, it's worth grounding ourselves in what archaeologists actually agree on, because the real story is already strange enough. The Great Sphinx sits on the Giza Plateau, just southeast of the Pyramid of Khafre. It's carved largely from a single mass of limestone bedrock. The body, paws, and much of the structure are the natural rock of the plateau itself, sculpted in place, with the head shaped from a slightly different, harder layer of stone at the top. Most Egyptologists date its construction to the reign of the pharaoh Khafre, around 2500 BCE, making it part of the same building program as the second pyramid at Giza. That would make the Sphinx roughly 4,500 years old, already ancient by the time the pyramids of later dynasties, the temples of Luxor, or even the reign of Tutankhamun came along. It's worth pausing on that. When Cleopatra ruled Egypt, the Sphinx was already older to her than the Roman Colosseum is to us today. It had already been buried in sand up to its neck at least once and dug out and restored more than once by the time of the pharaohs we consider ancient. That excavation history matters because it's part of why the legend of a hidden chamber has so much room to breathe. The Sphinx has literally vanished beneath the desert and been rediscovered before. Most famously, around 1400 BCE, when a young prince named Thutmose is said to have fallen asleep in its shadow and dreamed that the buried Sphinx promised him the throne of Egypt if he cleared the sand away. He did, and commemorated the story on a granite slab, now known as the Dream Stele, placed between the Sphinx's paws. So the idea of something significant hidden at the Sphinx, revealed only when the right person clears the way, that's not a modern invention. In some sense, it's baked into the monument's own recorded history, thousands of years before Edgar Cayce ever spoke a word. Section 2. Edgar Cayce and the Sleeping Prophet. To understand the Hall of Records legend, you have to understand the man behind it. Edgar Cayce was born in Kentucky in 1877. He had almost no formal education past grade school, and for most of his life, he worked as a photographer. But he became known, first locally, then nationally, for something unusual. He claimed that if he laid down, closed his eyes, and entered a trance-like sleep state, he could access information beyond ordinary knowledge. Medical diagnoses for people he'd never met, historical claims about lost civilizations, and predictions about the future. Over more than 40 years, Cayce reportedly gave thousands of these readings, which were transcribed by a stenographer, and Cayce, still in his trance state, would supposedly diagnose the problem and recommend a treatment. His supporters point to cases where his suggestions reportedly helped. His critics point out that verifying decades-old, informally documented medical claims is extremely difficult, and that many of his recommendations were vague or aligned with folk medicine of the era. But it's a smaller set of readings, not medical, but historical, that concern us here. Starting in the 1930s, Cayce began describing a lost civilization called Atlantis and connecting it directly to ancient Egypt. According to these readings, refugees from Atlantis fled to Egypt before their homeland was destroyed in a global cataclysm. And before that destruction, in order to preserve their civilization's knowledge for a future age, they built 3 repositories of records, one in Egypt, one that would later be found in the Yucatan, and one still resting beneath the sea near Bimini in the Atlantic.
The Egyptian repository, Cayce said, would be found in a hall connected to the Sphinx.
Section 3. The Cayce predictions about Giza. Here's roughly what the readings describe, paraphrased from the Cayce archive. Beneath the right paw of the Sphinx, there is a sealed chamber, part of a larger complex connected by tunnels to the Great Pyramid. Inside, sealed away for thousands of years, are records of Atlantis, its history, its science, and its downfall, stored not on paper, but on more durable material. Some accounts describe as thin sheets of metal or a form of ancient database. Cayce's readings place the original construction of this hall far earlier than mainstream archaeology places the Sphinx itself, tens of thousands of years earlier, tied to a lost age rather than the Old Kingdom of Egypt. And critically, Cayce didn't just describe the past, he put a timeline on the future. Various readings given across the 1930s and 40s connected the rediscovery of the Hall of Records to a period of global upheaval and to the closing years of the 20th century, language that believers have interpreted as pointing toward the 1990s as a likely window of discovery. Edgar Cayce died in 1945, more than 50 years before that window arrived. He never saw whether his prediction would hold up. But the readings didn't disappear. They were preserved by the organization he founded, the Association for Research and Enlightenment. And by the 1970s and 80s, they had found an eager audience among people drawn to Egypt's mysteries, and a growing number of independent researchers who decided to go looking for the chamber themselves. Which brings us to the part of the story where legend collides with actual fieldwork. Section 4. The real excavations beneath the Sphinx. It's important to say clearly, people really have searched for chambers beneath and around the Sphinx using real scientific instruments. This isn't only a story confined to psychic readings, it's also a story about actual geophysical surveys conducted by actual researchers, some of them with credentials from respected universities, and some of them independent researchers working with far more controversial methods. The most well-known of these efforts began in the late 1970s and continued through the 1990s, led by a team that included the researcher Robert Schoch, a geologist, and a controversial independent Egyptologist named John Anthony West, who was directly inspired by Cayce's readings. Working with SRI International, a respected research institute, the team ran seismic and electromagnetic surveys around the Sphinx enclosure in 1991. Seismic surveying works by sending sound waves into the ground and measuring how they bounce back. Solid bedrock reflects waves differently than an empty cavity does, and the 1991 survey did detect anomalies, areas beneath the surface, including one near the left paw of the Sphinx, where the readings suggested something other than solid rock. This made international headlines. It seemed for a moment like Cayce's prediction was about to be vindicated, almost exactly on schedule. But here's where the story gets more complicated. The Egyptian government's own antiquities authority did not authorize excavation of the anomaly. Mainstream Egyptologists were, and remain, deeply skeptical of the survey's interpretation, arguing that seismic anomalies in a plateau full of natural fissures, cavities, and centuries of quarrying don't automatically mean man-made chamber, let alone one built by a lost Atlantean civilization. Some geologists have suggested the anomalies are more likely explained by natural cracks, older tunnels dug by treasure hunters over the centuries, or limestone's naturally uneven density. No excavation into that specific anomaly near the Sphinx's paw has ever been publicly completed and verified, which means, as of today, we genuinely don't know what's there, not because it's being hidden, but because it's never been dug up. Section 5. Ground-penetrating radar and the anomalies. The 1991 seismic survey wasn't the only investigation. Over the following decades, other teams brought newer tools to the plateau: ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, and further seismic work, sometimes independently, sometimes in cooperation with Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. These follow-up surveys have found a genuinely complex picture. The Giza Plateau is riddled with cavities, some natural, carved by ancient water tables and geological processes, some clearly man-made, like the network of small tombs, shafts, and quarry cuts that Old Kingdom workers left behind, and a handful that remain
honestly ambiguous. Zahi Hawass, the Egyptologist who for years led Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities and has overseen more excavation at Giza than almost anyone alive, has been one of the most vocal public skeptics of the Hall of Records legend specifically. His position, stated repeatedly over decades of interviews and public talks, is that there is no credible archaeological evidence for a lost hall of Atlantean records beneath the Sphinx, and that the site has been surveyed and partially excavated enough that a chamber of the scale Cayce described would very likely have been found by now.
At the same time, Hawass and other Egyptologists don't deny that small cavities, shafts, and unexcavated spaces exist around the plateau. That's simply the nature of a site that's been quarried, built on, and buried and unburied for over 4,000 years. The disagreement isn't really about whether empty spaces exist underground. It's about what they are, how old they are, and whether any of them connect to anything resembling Cayce's prophecy. Chapter 8. Stephen Bax and the Plant Name Theory. A more cautious and more respected attempt came from Stephen Bax, a professor of applied linguistics, in 2014. Bax didn't claim to have translated the whole manuscript. Instead, he proposed proto-decodings for about 10 words, mostly plant and star names, by comparing Voynich illustrations to identifiable plants and cross-referencing with known medieval naming conventions in Arabic, Hebrew, and other languages of the period. Bax's approach was more methodologically careful than most, and he was explicit that this was a starting point, not a solution. He even invited other researchers to build on or challenge his work before he passed away in 2017. The problem? His proposed word-to-sound mappings haven't been independently confirmed, and applying them consistently across the rest of the manuscript hasn't produced coherent, readable text. It remains an interesting hypothesis rather than an accepted decoding. Chapter 9. Gerard Cheshire and the Proto-Romance Claim. In 2019, another wave of Solved headlines hit, this time from Gerard Cheshire, a research associate at the University of Bristol. Cheshire claimed the manuscript was written in a lost Proto-Romance language, an ancestor of modern Romance languages like Spanish, Italian, and French, and that he had translated substantial portions, including a passage he claimed described a volcanic eruption near the island of Volcano in Italy. The University of Bristol itself distanced itself from the claim shortly after publication. Linguists, including specialists in Romance language history, publicly criticized the paper, arguing Cheshire's translation method could be used to derive almost any desired meaning from the text, and that his proposed Proto-Romance language didn't match known linguistic evidence of how Romance languages actually developed. The journal that published the study faced criticism for its peer review process on this piece. This is a recurring pattern you'll notice throughout the manuscript's history. A claim generates press coverage faster than the academic community can respond to it, and by the time experts weigh in, the Solved headline has already reached millions of people. Chapter 10. The AI Translation Claims. More recently, as large language models and AI translation tools became widely available, a new wave of amateur decodings emerged, people feeding photos or transcriptions of Voynicians into AI systems and publishing the outputs as translations. These attempts run into an important structural problem. AI language and translation tools are built to produce fluent, plausible-sounding text based on patterns in known languages. When you feed them an unknown script, they don't have a verified ground truth to translate from. So whatever output comes back is essentially the model guessing at a plausible reconstruction, not a genuine decode of the original writing system. None of these AI-driven claims have been validated by cryptographers or linguists, and most fall apart the same way Gibbs and Cheshire's theories did. The translation doesn't hold up when checked against the actual internal consistency of the text. So, will it ever be solved? Here's the honest state of the research as of today. We know the manuscript is a genuine 15th century object. We know it has real structural and statistical patterns consistent with, but not proof of, meaningful language. We know some of history's best code breakers failed to crack it. And we know that at least one credible, testable alternative, that it's an elaborate, meaningless hoax, has never been fully ruled out. Every solved claim of the last decade has shared the same flaw. It explains a handful of words or a single passage
then fails to produce a consistent, verifiable, complete translation that other experts can check and reproduce. That reproducibility is the actual bar for a real decipherment, the same standard that confirmed things like Egyptian hieroglyphics after the Rosetta Stone or Linear B in the 1950s. Until someone clears that bar, the honest answer is no one has decoded the Voynich manuscript. It remains one of the very few documented mysteries in the world where the object is unquestionably real and the puzzle is unquestionably still open. Maybe that's the most interesting thing about it. In a world where nearly everything gets explained eventually, this one book has quietly outlasted every attempt for over 600 years.
If a real breakthrough ever happens, it won't come from a headline. It'll come from a translation that any linguist in the world can test against the full manuscript and get the same result. Until then, the book sits in a climate-controlled vault at Yale, fully digitized, free for anyone to study. If you want to look at the actual pages yourself, the Beinecke Library's full scan is linked in the description. It's genuinely worth spending 10 minutes scrolling through. If you enjoyed this, subscribe for more deep dives into real unsolved mysteries, the kind where we tell you what's actually known, not just what gets clicks.